Hey pilots, Drain Man here, and today I got a very special video. In today's video, we are going to continue on our how to build a monster drone playlist. This freaking monster quadcopter is like 2.5 feet and it's really starting to come together. We have moved through a lot of stuff. We've got motors on, ESCs on. We are moving right along. We're about to start wiring everything up and then we're taking this thing to the sky. All right, pilots, here's the deal. This is a playlist and this is not the first video. So I don't want you to ruin the build by not watching the whole thing. So if you haven't seen the first video or the second video, then you can't watch this video. I want you to go right now down to the video description and go back to the beginning and watch this whole thing from the beginning. You'll see the logo. It looks something like this. And enjoy the show. All right, pilots, let's go. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we got to go ahead and kick our soldering iron back on. I'm going to let it warm back up. Then we need to strip the wires. And with small wire like this, you can just use your fingernail. If you've got small wire strippers, go ahead and use them. There ain't no shame in that. After you strip those wires, then we need to go ahead and tin them just like we would any other wires. After they're tinned, then we will solder them up. So I'm going to tin my PDB first. Okay, while we're in here, we're going to go ahead and tin our ESC pad. So all of our pads are tinned. Now is the perfect time for my ceramic tweezers. And we need to go ground first. Then our next wire is going to be our signal wire, which I'm going to run in red. Okay, and then last but not least is going to be our telemetry wire. And this one I'm going to run in yellow. You do not have to follow my same color scheme. You can use your own color scheme. It won't matter. So there we go. We're tinned on our wires and our pads are already tinned. So once again, we will start with our ground. Okay, then we need our signal, which my signal is red. And then last but not least is going to be our telemetry wire. All right, so now we've got our ground going to ground, signal to signal, and telemetry to telemetry. So even though I knew exactly where I was putting it, I wanted to double check my work, because you get one wire wrong, sorry about your luck. And double checking it twice, you know, it only takes a second. All right, I'm going to give that a quick little clean. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to tin these pads next. And you need to be very careful whenever you're tinning a pad like this, because they have a huge hole in the middle. And if your solder drips down that hole and ends up against the carbon, you're going to now have an electrical connection between your frame and your PDB. And I'm going to tell you now, that won't be good. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to focus on the edges more than anything. All right. And that is our ground. And now I'm going to do our ground for the ESC. Now this one, I actually have the 3D print, which we thought was going to be a problem, but has actually been helping. It's kept my solder from dropping down. Alright pilots, so I have decided I am going to go ahead, I know, I'm going to run 10 gauge wire from the PDB to my batteries, because that is the main force of power that's coming in. That is where all of my amperage is going to be running. It's going to be pulling right through that as fast as these motors can suck it out of there. But what I'm doing is I'm pulling in 10 gauge from the battery. I'm going to run 12 gauge from the PDB to the ESC, and then from the ESC to the motor is 14. So we've got 10, 12, 14. I think it's perfect. All right, let's go ahead and get this 12 gauge wire soldered up and put on. So it's very important to make sure that you're flowing the solder all the way through. See what I'm doing here? Not sure you can see that. Very important. Alright, now the one downside to holding, because you have to hold your soldering iron on that wire until that solder has bled all the way through the inside little strands, because there's hundreds of little strands inside of there, and if you just you're not going to flow the solder through it, and then you're going to have what's called a cold solder joint, and you're going to also have a bunch of wire that doesn't have solder around it. So it's very important that you get that all the way hot and you let that flow all the way through. What's the downside? The downside to that is you burn up all your flux. And that's where these flux pens come in handy, because you just take them and you add some flux back to the picture. Because right now, this wire has no flux in it. And that's because we burned it all off. Which, if you're not burning it all off, then you're probably not soldering it right. Alright, so our goal is to go from here to here. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now our goal is to shoot from the PDB to the ESC. So we want to head in that direction. That was beautiful. Now what I'm going to do is take a little bit of flux, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. And I will do that by bringing fresh solder, which has fresh flux in it, plus the flux I added. I'll wipe my tip and I'll swoop in like a dark night. Boom. And now that joint just went from perfectly bonded. So here's what we had. We had a perfectly bonded joint that was completely ugly. So then I swooped in, hit them, and now look at that thing. That is a beautiful solder joint. We do have a barrier now. We're trying to avoid our signal, ground, and telemetry wire, which are right in the freaking way, of course. So I'm gonna go right there. All right. Now we need to go ahead and strip this side. Now we need to twist those up. And we need to go ahead and tin it just like we would any other. And that is beautiful. And what are we going to do? We are going to come in and clean it up. Alright, now we did pinch our wire underneath there. Let's take a look at that. Yep, they're good. Look, they're moving. If you watch, I can slide them back and forth, which means They're just simply tucked right there, which I don't know that that's something we would have been able to avoid just because of how tight everything is. And now we are ready for the next pad, and this one is going to be the positive pad. So what we want to do is we want to get some solder, and we are going to tin both our pads again. And we're back to the same thing. Make sure you're being careful and you're not dripping down, because if you drip down and you make contact to that carbon, you might as well freaking throw it away. Alright, I'm going to put a blob where I can. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and get this one flowed up. And we're on to the red wire. Let's go ahead and strip this guy. Fantastic. Make sure you give it some good twists. You don't want any frayed wires. So once it's twisted up, and next up is to go ahead and tin this bad boy. Now you see the solder just went, but I have not stopped. I'm gonna keep going. All right, that is a beautiful, beautiful tin. It's tinned well and it looks good. It is perfect for my standards. I am not a rocket scientist. All right, now what we're gonna do is we are gonna solder to there like this, and then we're gonna wrap around to here like that. Boom. All right, next up is we are headed to here, and then this ESC will be connected. Cut this. Boom. We need to strip it. Now let's get this guy twisted up. And let's tin him. And let's go for it. Wow, that flowed really nice. Clean this up. So there it is. Let's take a close-up at it. Let's see if we can. Look at that. That looks good. Those are short, fat wires, but they are connected and they look really good. And they're super strong. They're clean. There's not flux everywhere. We've got no solder balls. I mean, this just looks fantastic. All right, pilots, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do the other three. I'm not gonna make you sit here and watch me do it 3 more times. You saw how it's done. I'm gonna hit the other 3 and then we'll meet back here in the middle. All right, pilots, we are back. I have completed the other 3 ESCs. We now have all 4 done and ready to go. All right, so taking a close look, you can see where I've ran the negative wire, I've ran the positive wire, and then we had the signal, ground, and telemetry wire for each and every ESC. So I want to go ahead and make a pit stop, or take a pit stop, and I want to go ahead and run a continuity, because if we have an issue, let's find out now rather than after we've put it all together and then try to troubleshoot after. So let's see what we got. There's a ground and there's a positive. All right, so we are fantastic. As of right now, we do not have any shorts. So we are good to go. The system is not short-circuited. Everything is on strong and tight, and just everything is just looking really good and has come together really, really well. This is what it'll look like with the canopy closed. And I know that looks absolutely sick. So now we are ready to dive into putting our flight controller on. The flight controller actually is going to mount up here. I don't want to put it here, and that's because Catalyst designed this so that way your flight controller is here, and this is connected by 3D prints, which will actually make it like a soft mounted. And then we've got grommets on the flight controller, so we're kind of double soft mounted. And with these big old motors, there's going to be a lot of vibration. We're going to need everything we can get. The blue mat is back. Alright, first thing we need to do is get our flight controller out and just kind of get a look-see and see what we're going to be dealing with here. These wires aren't very long, so it's not going to make it from the PDB up to this wall where I need it, including the fact that I need to make sure that my USB connection, my micro USB, is not facing backwards or frontwards. I need it to be coming out of the side so that way I can connect later and work on this thing without having a ton of difficulties. For my receiver, I have decided to go with Crossfire, and that is because I have a Crossfire module inside of my radio. If you are curious or want to know how to set this Crossfire up, I have a full video on it, and it's a very short video and it covers everything you need to know in like 10 minutes. So I will link that down inside of the video description. Now, last but not least is going to be our VTX. I have chosen this double-decker monster because it's huge and I've been dying to put it in a build for a long time, but the simple fact is it just doesn't fit in anything. No matter what quad I try to put this in, it just doesn't fit. Now I finally got a build where I know it's gonna fit. One last thing I want to show you guys is the camera. I'm going to be using a Foxeer Falcor camera. This one is in perfect condition. I had it on a drone and then I broke that drone, so needless to say, that drone doesn't need it anymore. So there's our 5-volt, motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, and motor 4. I'm not going to worry about where's 1, where's 2, where's 3, 4. I'm just going to solder them up in what looks best for my wiring, and then what I'll do is I'll resource it or remap it inside of Betaflight. Okay, so we now have the wires connected for our 4 motors, our power to the flight controller, and our ground for the flight controller. The next couple pads you'll see in line are going to be another ground, a current sensor, and a volt sensor. We don't really need the current sensor, and the voltage sensor you gotta have because when you're flying and your OSD is flashing telling you your voltage is low, or when you plug in a pack to know whether it's charged or not, this is where that comes from, that right there. Well, there is a barrier here because I looked up the spec on this, and the voltage sensor for this flight controller can only handle 35 volts. Now that's a major problem because this quadcopter is a 12S. That means that I'm going to be running 50 something volts through this thing, 48, 50 volts. So what that's going to do is burn this thing up instantly. And that right there is why the ESC telemetry comes into play and is so important, because we are going to actually pull our battery voltage from the ESCs, because the ESCs are dealing in full LiPo voltage, so they are going to know what the voltage is, and we are going to use it to tell the flight controller what to do. Alright pods, so next up is going to be a couple wires for our Crossfire. We are going to need to connect our RX and our TX. So there is my Crossfire wires, and you'll see that I'm actually running them downward, and that's because that's what's going to be facing up on the flight controller, and I don't want them going up to loop back down. I want them to head straight in the direction that they're going to be going. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is our video transmitter, and we're really just prepping, and then we'll put everything on the quad all at one time. Now, for this Unify, there's tons of stuff going on here that you normally don't have. So I don't want a bunch of loose wires just laying around, so I'm going to depin some of this stuff. I don't want to use the Crossfire for my smart audio. I'd rather run it directly from the flight controller. I do plan to put Lewis scripts on this build, so I want to make sure that I wire it all up and everything is ready to go. So there's my voltage, I'm going to need that. There's my ground, I'm going to need that. Here is voltage that is going out. So that's 5 volts out. Technically I could power my flight controller from this, but that's not what I want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to depin that. for the voltage, this VTX is wanting anywhere from 7 to 36 volts. So seeing the fact that our flight controller only takes 5 volts, it just doesn't have enough to put out to this. So we are going to pull voltage from the PDB and then jump up to this. So we're going to have that wire going down. And then the next wire we need is our ground for our 5 volts out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run that ground over to my flight controller. So I'm going to be grounding this VTX from the PDB and from the flight controller. Is that necessary? No, not at all. Is it going to help? I don't know, probably not. But I want to run it because I want the best video I can possibly get. And then the last wire here is video, and then we have crossfire TX and receive. I am going to disconnect the TX because I don't need it, but I do need the receive because that is my smart audio. And the smart audio is the white wire like it usually is. And if you've never depinned one of these, you just stick a little blade under there and just gently lift up on it while pulling out. Don't butcher it up though. So this is actually a good wire we can use for something else. And let's also get rid of these 5 volts here. 5 volt out, as we don't need it. Okay. Now that is connected to the other end, so I'm going to go ahead and slice this end off. And this basically is a plug and play, and you could use it if you wanted to. If you wanted to just plug this into your camera, you could. My plan is to use the screws that this came with, not the screws, but the screw holes, because this double-decker design actually has screws. And I've measured this, and this is 20 by 20 mounting. So I can actually use this, and I'll mount it actually held in by screws rather than just trusting double-sided sticky tape. And then what that'll do is allow plenty of airflow, and it'll have it extremely secured to the build. So that's my plan. We're going to give it a shot. Alright, that was no fun, but it did work out beautifully. That's a great place to mount it. It's on so tight and strong. It's out of the way, and it's up top, front and center. Let me show you. See? So it is going to get the best maximum airflow possible. And then plus our antenna's mounting here, so that makes it a straight shot to that. We are in beautiful shape. All right, pilots, it has been so much fun. We are moving right along right through this playlist, and we are getting this monster drone built, and it is coming out amazing. I don't want you guys to miss out, so make sure you're subscribed so that way you can catch the very next video of this series, because when it drops, it might include the flying portion of this build because we're getting close. I'm so excited. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you on the next one.